Did you know that the US government can have an insane amount of control and impact on your life, even if you leave? I also made a video on TikTok about this, but I decided to remake it for YouTube again. And it all started with this TikTok that I came across.
If you're an American and you move abroad to a different country, you could be limited in what you're allowed to do financially, and it's really annoying. So I want to tell you about it just so you're aware. So I'm not sure if you know this, but the US is one of 4 countries in the entire world that double taxes its citizens. Now, there's a threshold for this, and you have a certain amount that you are allowed to earn outside of the United States, and you won't be taxed on that as long as you fill out the correct form when you're doing your taxes. This is called the foreign earned income tax exclusion.
So just a point on this is correct and incorrect because it really depends on your case. You can't make a sweeping statement like this for this specific law because this specific law is governed by bilateral treaties. So treaties that America has with specific countries, and every single treaty is different. And even within the treaties, there are different cases. So for example, in my case, in the case of Italy, if you are a self-employed American working in Italy, it actually doesn't matter how much you make. The foreign earned income exclusion only applies to income tax. It doesn't apply to self-employment tax or your social security contributions. So what ends up happening is if you make more than $400, that is the limit for this case, you will have to pay your income tax in Italy and your social security contributions in America. That's what the treaty says. So this wide range idea of you need to make 100K before you pay to both countries is not necessarily true in all cases.
You need to know is, for example, I live in France. As long as my earnings in France do not exceed the equivalent of 117,000 US dollars, I won't be double taxed. But say I earned 150,000 in France. Well, on that remaining like 30,000-ish, the US would tax me on that. Isn't that insane, first of all?
That's true.
But that's not the main problem that I want to talk about. Because America is one of the only countries that do this, if you are an American living abroad, whatever bank you have, they have to fill out forms. It's a certain document that they must send to the US every year because the US wants to know what's in your bank account. Love that for us. It's giving North Korea. So it's for this reason that it's notoriously difficult for Americans to open foreign bank accounts, at least in France. Obviously, every single American that lives in France has a bank account, but getting one is not so simple.
Same thing in Italy.
And a lot of French banks will straight up say, no, we're not taking Americans. And it's because of that reason, because once a year, they have to fill out specific forms and send them to the US. And I get it. It's a headache for them, right? And for what? Just speaking about me and my friends, it's not like me and my friends are rich. So it's not like having us as clients is a benefit for them. So I understand. But if you're the American that's trying to live your life abroad, this can be annoying.
The rest is really her specific case, and it's not really relevant to this video, but you guys kind of get the gist. I also want to just tell you guys what is FATCA for the people that don't know. So FATCA, or the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, is a 2010 US federal law requiring all non-US foreign financial institutions to search their records for customers with indicia of a connection to the US, including indications in records of birth, basically US citizens, or prior residency in the US. So also non-citizens, I guess, but I guess permanent residents, and to report such assets and the identities of persons that hold such assets to the United States Department of the Treasury. And you add on top of FATCA the US's policy of taxing its citizens, even if they don't live in the US, and you have the perfect storm. Hey YouTube, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Tia, and in addition to being an American that has been living in Italy for the past 11 years, I'm also an econ grad and a business owner. And so this topic is not only interesting to me from a theoretical perspective, it is also insanely relevant in my life. Everything that the original creator said, it is essentially the same in Italy, and it totally sucks. I think the worst way that the US government puts its citizens at a disadvantage through this legislation is the fact that it doesn't allow us to save for retirement. Now, quick recap. In case you guys didn't know, the public pension systems in the Western world are pretty much all on the brink of collapse. You hit 65 and you get to stop working and you receive a monthly pension that essentially allows you to maintain your standard of living without working. Yeah, that's not gonna happen for us when we hit 65. And unless you are aware of this and actively doing something to hedge against it, you will work until you. So what we're supposed to be doing at this age, in our 20s, in our early 30s, is we're supposed to be contributing to actually tax efficient integrated pensions, such as IRAs in the United States, or in Italy, they're actually called integrated pensions. So what's the problem for Americans living abroad? Well, if I wanted to get the Italian version of an integrated pension, the US government would view that pension account as an offshore account and they would penalize it from a tax perspective. I'm not allowed to have that kind of account. And because of FATCA and everything that the original creators said in the original video, banks and financial institutions in Europe aren't even letting US citizens have access to those anyways. But you're like, fine, I'm an American. There are also American options. There's, you know, the Roth IRAs and different IRAs. Well, no, because the caveat to getting an American integrated pension or an IRA is that you have to be contributing American earned income into that IRA. And if you are living abroad, you're probably not making money in America. So you can't have a pension account outside the US, but you also can't have a pension account within the US. So I'm essentially just supposed to work until I. One of the most important financial decisions I would go on to make was to get these, specifically these. In 2019, something told me that I wanted to get my parents' passports. My mom is Jamaican, my dad is Nigerian. And as an entrepreneur, I already knew that West Africa was it. I knew I needed to get into that market and the Nigerian passport was gonna be helpful for that. And it has been insanely useful for that. But also Jamaica, I spent a lot of my childhood in Jamaica. I was raised by my Jamaican family, and I feel a cultural connection to the island. It's a beautiful place. If World War III were to break out, I would go to Jamaica. I would go to one of the mountains in Jamaica, and regardless of whatever happens, Jamaica's not a bad place to go out in. But, you know, assuming that the world doesn't end, it's my dream and my goal to actually retire in Jamaica. So for these reasons, I wanted my parents' passports back in 2019. Now, I had no idea that just a year later, the whole world would essentially be locked down and you wouldn't be able to move or go anywhere without a passport to said country. And that passports and citizenships and global mobility in general would become such a big deal. 5 years later, I think it's gone on to become even more of a big deal. Why have these passports become useful? Well, because I have passports from so-called quote unquote, as our president once said, whole countries. And these whole countries don't give a damn about America. European and Western institutions actually have something to lose with regards to America. And America has a different type of sway over these institutions. Because how does America get foreign banks to listen to it in the case of FATCA? How is America able to enforce a law like FATCA? Well, those foreign banks have investments in the US. And the US says that if you don't comply with FATCA, if you don't do what we tell you to do, we are going to put penalties on all of those investments. Or maybe we just won't allow you to invest at all. And since the US stock market is the one that everybody wants access to, a bank in the West is not going to want to lose access to that. So that's how America is able to enforce this thing beyond its borders. But even aside from that, think about the fact that there are visa-free relations between the US and most Western countries. Now, it's easy to say that if America cuts off visa-free access to, say, the EU, that European countries would just cut them off back. But I don't think the EU wants this. I don't think America would want to risk all of that, but I think that the EU would not want to risk it even more because America makes up a huge market for the things that the EU sells. And there are even some countries like Italy that depend a lot on, say, tourism, and a lot of these tourists are Americans and they come here because they don't need visas. So you see, there's a lot of different ways that America is able to enforce their policies, enforce their ideologies on Americans outside of America, when those Americans are in other Western countries that in certain ways are dependent on the United States. But to countries like these that don't have visa-free access to the US and that are a bit resentful towards the way that America uses its hegemony in the world, if I buy a house in Nigeria tomorrow, Nigeria is not telling anybody. I had an insurance agent tell me in Jamaica that it's really a don't ask, don't tell policy over there. They are looking at you as a Jamaican citizen in Jamaica, getting a Jamaican investment or retirement plan, and they're not going to tell the US that you're American. Now, I still need to do my research, so I have not acted on any of these things, but in theory. So I just wanted to add an extra point because, you know, this is not TikTok, it's YouTube, and I need to be a bit less flippant and more serious. All I'm basically trying to say is because many African and Caribbean countries don't enforce FATCA as aggressively, it creates a sort of layer of privacy for you. And this is not to hide income, but more so to avoid overregulation and bureaucracy. Because when you have those accounts in Europe, I'm even just speaking about normal bank accounts, as an American, not only do you have to like fill out extra paperwork and deal with extra checking from the European authorities, but I've even had situations where bank accounts would just have to be closed because some policy would change and suddenly like I wasn't welcome as a client anymore. Meanwhile, in these countries where FATCA isn't being enforced as aggressively, that paperwork does not exist. Those extra checks do not exist. That being said, you do still have to report foreign bank accounts that have more than, I think it's $10,000 in them, or if the overall value of all of your bank accounts abroad exceed $200,000. If you don't do that, that's evasion, and you could face hefty fines if you do that. But there are other banking systems in the world that are solid, that have great interest rates, that will allow you to have a level of privacy and a level of peace with them, and you typically only have access to bank accounts if you are a permanent resident or a citizen of that country. It's good to diversify your wealth, it's good to diversify your investments, and in this ever-changing world, as an American, I think it's important to have other options. By other options, I mean real other options, and not people who can throw us out to the sharks when they're ready because they are more dependent on said sharks. Given some kind of strange comments that I got on the original video, I think it can't hurt to add, as I already said, I pay a lot of tax. I pay all the tax that I need to pay to everybody that I need to pay it to, and I have no hidden offshore assets. So that is why I am pretty comfortable in sharing this information that I feel like is just that, not advice, but information that I think everybody should know is out there. I think these passports are going to get a lot more valuable. And actually, it's not even I think. If you're one of those people that are truly affected by FATCA, so an American living abroad making more than 100K a year, if you're making more than 100K outside of America, you are doing extremely well for yourself. And you can also, at that rate, afford to buy a passport essentially. Specifically, at that rate, at that salary, you can afford a Caribbean passport, because there are some Caribbean countries, not Jamaica, but others, that are allowing foreigners to give a investment or a donation to their country and in exchange have a passport there. The passport ranking system thing, the company that invented that is literally a for-profit company that helps people to essentially buy passports. So honestly, that ranking, that little passport ranking, powerful passport, it was invented for that demographic of people to do this. All of that was invented for this. Even with all of that being said, I want to add a little bit of perspective. I used to get really frustrated by this whole FATCA thing. Paying taxes and being an adult is not fun. And if you have to do that twice in 2 different countries every single year, it can be pretty heavy. But when I left my American bubble, and furthermore, when I left my Western bubble, I started to really deep the privilege that comes with even just having an American passport. Like, even with FATCA, and even with the annoyance of having to pay, in my case, pay taxes 2 times in 2 different countries, due to the treaties, you could actually end up paying less tax than you would if you were a national of that European country. In my case, in Italy, as a self-employed person, because Social Security taxes are less in the US, overall, I actually end up paying less tax than if I were paying income tax and Social Security in Italy. Now, don't you worry, when it all adds up, I'm still paying above 50% in tax. I'm still paying upwards of 60% marginally, but all that to say is it could be worse. I could literally be a self-employed Italian in Italy. Yeah. And why is that? Because I'm an American, and that's a privilege to me. America, despite it all, has always been there. It's annoying that America has this much sway on my life outside of America, but when push came to shove, the Americans were there. When COVID came, I got those stimulus checks all the way in Italy. I got like $4,000 in cash from the stimulus checks because I'm an American taxpayer. Meanwhile, in Italy, where I'm also a taxpayer, nothing, zero. Actually, I think at one point, my accountant was able to get me back 3,000 euros, which afterwards I had to give all back. When it comes to something banal, like getting your passport renewed, my Italian friends end up having to lie or create scamotage, they say in Italian, to get a passport appointment or get their passport in a time that like makes sense, because there's always backlogs, there's always inefficiencies. And so like it was said under a lot of my past videos, if I would ever renounce my US citizenship, absolutely not, I never would. Aside from the fact that, as I've also said in my last videos, I feel American. I was born and raised in the US. I spent all of my like formative years in the US. America, up until now, even with all of its huge flaws, and even if I don't agree with what my leaders do ideologically speaking, does come through for its citizens. Regardless of where you go, you're always going to be more privileged than someone else. Privilege is a fact of life, and it's very fluid. I don't think there's anything wrong with having privilege. I think that what is wrong is when you don't use that privilege for good, when you don't use that privilege to speak up for things that are important, when you don't use that privilege to stand up for people that are being stepped on, given the direction that the world is going in. I think that Americans are starting to spread out around the world because they're realizing that the US is not the be-all end-all. It's my country, it's my culture, it's my people, and my heart aches at the fact that it didn't pan out to be what I was taught it was. Given where we're at and what is going on with our country and what is going on in the world, these are things that you just kind of need to know. And I feel like the last part about privilege is also important to take into consideration as an American moving in this world. There was a lot of twists and turns in this video, but I would love to hear what you guys think. I would love to hear your guys' opinion in the comment section down below. As always, if you're interested in more topics like these about my international life and my international perspective, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, I will see you guys in my next one. Mwah.